All right, let's get started. So I was thinking that I'll first show you a bit about the final product that we're hoping to achieve today, and then get started. I've added the link to the template project that we'll be using with Unity to the chat, as well as instructions on what Unity version we're on and all that. So I hope you've received the info somewhere on about that before. But then, of course, if you don't have Unity at hand, you can just follow along. This will be recorded, so you can then watch later and do yourself later too. So, but yeah, I'll show you first. So everyone probably knows what Flappy Bird is. This is a version that I made with some free assets from Feepic for the graphics, and code is of course my own. Some animations for the bird. Let's see if we have time to do that or not. But at least the scrolling thing and scoring while you pass the obstacles. And yeah, I decided to go for there's a bit of an icy theme as it's still pretty wintry here in Finland. So let's see, we can call it the icy bird maybe as a game. But yeah, this is what we hope to achieve today. Let me just close this one. So I will be checking the chat periodically if you have any questions on the what we're doing. I'll I'll let you know where I'm checking it and let you know about the answers then too. But yeah, if you've downloaded the template and you have Unity Hub, open that. This is my Unity Hub. So you can find the project. You need to add it from the disk. So if you downloaded the template and extracted the zip somewhere, I've extracted it to my home folder on my Mac. So I'll open the Flappy Bird template project and add it here to my Unity Hub. And then I'll just click the name for it to open it. It will take a moment when it loads all the packages and whatnot to get started. And yeah, I will share also a link to the final product in that sense. So if you wanna later on check how did I do things, what was the thing that I did, I will share a link to that. That's the product I made before when testing this out. So not, everything might not be exactly as on this video, but pretty close at least. All right, now I've got my Unity open. Oh no, I don't want to reset my Windows. Let's see if I can open it again. The usual demo effect. Let's see how it goes. Just want to, well, let's restore everything then. So then it will look like something like this. I will do a bit of reorganizing my windows so that I can see. I'll take the game window from here and drag it just to the below the scene window so I can see the scene and the game at the same time. This is especially useful later when we are trying to figure out what's happening in the game and what do we see in the game scene. But no worries about that if you can't do that right now. You can just follow along. All right, let's get started. I won't see the chat now for a moment, but I'll get back to it in a sec. So, all right, now you have hopefully gotten the project open if you're doing this with me. From the project tab, you can find a set of folders that I have included some remade assets for us to get quickly started. First, open the Flappy scene from the scene folder. It doesn't look any different. Nothing changes here because it's just an empty scene, but it will be easier to save to once it's already ready here. Then the first thing we want to get doing is we want to get a bird to our game project. So let's take there's a sprite here in the sprites folder, and if you expand from the arrow, you can see that there's two sprites actually there, bird down and bird up. If we have time, we'll use the other one for the animation, but let's see. But yeah, first take the bird down sprite, drag it into the hierarchy here to the scene. So you'll see the bird is now spawned here, and as this is a 3D scene, you can turn it around. I'm with my Mac, I'm pressing the Option button, the Alt button to fly around the scene, rotate it, and then you can also zoom in and zoom out. I'm gonna use the gizmo here to turn it a bit so that it's looking the same as in my game screen, so then I know that I'm looking it from the front, and when it's moving to the right, it's actually moving. Or a secret, this is actually not moving, and won't be moving the bird left and right, but we'll see about that a bit later. All right, let's then name this game object that we've added here on the hierarchy as a bird. It was called bird down as per the sprite name, but let's call it just a bird. Easy way to rename it on my Mac, at least. I just press the enter, and then it lets me rename it double. Then, or you can right click it and then find the rename from the context menu too. With Command S or Control S, if you're on Windows, you can always save the scene. You see the small indicator disappearing from the corner of the scene name, so then you know you've saved your changes. All right, now we have a bird. Let's also bring in the ground so that we have something that the bird can hit later on. And as a thing, we want to move this down a bit. If you don't see the arrow gizmos here, select the correct mode from the top, or use the W key to access the move tool, and then you can just drag it, or you can just drag a slider here in the inspector view also if you want to move it down. Let's move it down somewhere there so that it actually is the ground. Perfect. All right. Now we have almost ready scene. We want to add still a solid background instead of this nice skybox that we are now viewing. So click on the main camera. That's already the camera that's already set up in the scene. That's what Unity always creates for you as a ready-made thing. And we can easily change the mode of the camera from the inspector and select a solid color now. So we'll get this nice pale blue background for our game. Now it already looks quite much as the one that I already showed you, so that's great. One more thing that we have to do is set up the sprite orders, or the kind of sorting layers for this sprite, so that we know what goes in front of what. We have the bird that should, of course, always be on top of everything. Then we will soon have the icicles as the obstacles that we're going to try to flap past. And then we have the ground here. So from the sorting layers, I've already created these sorting layers. So let's just add the ground to the ground layer and the bird to the bird layer. These will make sure that the bird is on top of everything and all that. It's not a big thing if you miss this. It's just for the visuals to look nice. All right, I'll quickly check the chat if there's any questions. Nothing much, it seems. All right, someone that wasn't aware that we needed Unity and they want to install it really quickly. It will take a bit of time there, so that's why I wanted to hopefully inform everyone that we will be using Unity, because it takes a moment to install, but it should be fairly easy to get along later on if you still can. Let's see how that goes. All right, now we have the basic setup for our scene ready. So then we want to start setting up something that we call colliders in Unity. These colliders will make it possible to detect if the bird has hit the ground, if the bird has hit an obstacle maybe, and other things that we will need later on. So let's get started with that first. Let's select the bird object from the hierarchy, and then in the inspector we want to add a new component. From the add component, you can select through the ready-made list here, or then, as I usually do, you can just search from the search box. We want to add a polygon collider 2D to the bird. So let's add that to the bird. Also, for the ground, we want to add another kind of collider. If you double click on an object in the scene or in the hierarchy, it will show you it in the scene. So if you were zoomed in really close, you might want to click the ground so that you see it better. For the ground, we want to add a box collider 2D. We're working in 2D and not 3D, so let's use 2D stuff now. Let's add it, and you can hopefully see the pale, very pale and really thin green line around the object here, we see that it's a bit higher up the upper part of it than we would probably want. So we can use the edit mode here, or then use the controllers here for the size to scale it down a bit so that the bird doesn't hit the ground before it's actually on the ground. You can exit the edit mode from here, or just selecting another object will exit it automatically. And let's save our scene now. And let's see, we can already press the play now, and we should see, oh yeah, not see yet anything, because we are still missing one more component from the bird. Let's add a rigid body 2D component to our bird. This is something that Unity uses to drive the physics. Unity has a built-in physics engine in it, so this will make it possible for the bird to react to the physics. So if we now press the play mode, the bird should drop to the ground. Perfect. We can try it once more. Great. Now we see that our colliders are working. The bird is colliding with the ground and it doesn't fall through it. So that's what we need for the first step. All right, I'll quickly again check the chat. There's just some emoting going on, some GIFs to discuss the situation with the Unity install. That is taking probably a moment. But yeah, as Kimberly suggested, I recommend that maybe you just watch along and then do later with the recording and the instructions. All right. Now we want to start adding our first script. So let's go to the assets folder here and first create a new folder that we will call scripts. I find it from the context menu, so when I click on the right mouse button here and then the create menu, and at the top there's a folder selection. Let's go into the scripts folder, and similarly, let's create a new C# script. We will call this simply bird. All right. Also, as a prerequisite, I hope that you would have some kind of a text editor set up. I recommended VS Code. So from the Unity preferences on Windows, you can find this from Edit and Preferences. I think can't quite remember from the top of my head. You can find a setting for the external tools and pick your editor there if it isn't included already. I'm using VS Code, so from the preferences you can find the external tools and then VS Code here, or another editor if you're using something else. Then by double clicking the bird script, it should direct you to your text editor, and we can start actually coding something. All right, so what do we now have? We have a bird that's falling to the ground, and as we know from Flappy Bird, if you hit a pipe or hit a ground, then your bird will be dead and your game will be over. So let's make a variable that is a Boolean that is called is dead. This is how we will specify if our bird is dead or not. All right, and what Unity provides us is the start and update methods. I'll talk about the start a bit later, but in the update is run. Usually the frame rate we're targeting is 60 frames per second, so it is run 60 times a second to be able to update all the physics and whatever we need for running our game. So in the update, we want to check that if the bird is dead, this is true, or you can just omit the equals true from here, as it's true here. So what do we want to do then? All right. Well, then we would want to kind of stop the bird from moving. But then, of course, we don't have the bird moving yet. So let's first make it flap when you press the mouse button. For that, we will need a reference to the rigid body component that we just added to the bird. So let's create a variable that is of type rigid body 2D. Let's call it RB, and Then in the start method, what happens in the start method is that every time your game activates or this game object activates, it calls automatically this start. And in this start, we can, for example, use the built-in get component method to get the rigid body 2D component from this game object that this script is attached to the RB, that is our rigid body. All right, then what we would still need to be able to be flap, we will need to add a serialized variable for the force that we want to apply to the bird. So we will need this serialized field modifier for a variable so that it's visible in the Unity inspector. And then let's create a float called, let's call it up force. All right, now we have an up force. We will set that soon in Unity. And then we want to use that now to apply the force to the bird. Let's finish this first. So if the bird is dead, we want to basically do nothing. We can just return from the update method. However, if our bird is not dead, then we want to actually use a built-in method in Unity to check that if we have input dot get mouse button down 0. What this will do is it will check that if the player has pressed the first mouse button to give us some input. If that has happened, then we want to apply the force to the bird. But let's first do a quick setup thing. Let's set the RB's velocity to vector 2.0. What this will do, it will set the velocity to 0 so that it doesn't start moving. It only moves up when we press the up, and we reset the velocity here first. And then let's apply the first the RB with add force method that's built in, and let's use the up force there. All right, let's then go back to Unity. Wait a sec when it compiles our script. Oh no, it says it cannot convert from float to Unity engine vector 2. I've made a mistake here, as the force needs to be a vector 2, so we'll just make it a vector 2, where a new vector 2, where the x component of the force is 0 and the y component is the up force. All right, let's go back to Unity. We'll recompile our scripts, and hopefully the compile error disappears. It did. Great. And then let's add the bird script to the bird game object that we have. Again, with the search, we can find it and add it. And as we now have the up force as 0, the flapping wouldn't do anything. So let's add it, for example, or make it 300 for testing. Then let's press play and see if we can flap. All right, now that I'm clicking my mouse button, my bird moves up. And yeah, this is the secret. We won't be actually moving the bird left and right. We'll just move the background and the obstacles, and the bird will just move up and down here in the same place. All right, let's do one more thing in the script. So what we want to now do is check that if we have hit the ground or later on in any obstacle, we want to set the bird to dead. Unity has this built-in method for on collision. Enter 2D again to check if we've hit, if this game object that this script is attached to is hitting some other collider. If this happens, we'll just want to set the is dead to true. That way we know that now we've hit some other collider. Let's test that out. This means that now that once we let it fall to the ground, after we flapped a few times maybe for testing, we shouldn't be able to flap again. And this doesn't work. Now I'm pressing my mouse a lot, but it doesn't flap anymore because now it's dead. It hit the ground. All right, I'll save the scene with Control S or Command S on Mac, and I'll quickly check the chat. All right, nothing much more except a nice fast typing GIF again. I hope everyone is following along nicely. And let me know if you have any questions about Unity or the methods we're using, or anything relating to that. Great. Let's continue. Now we have already a flapping bird, so that's super great. What we want to add next is some text to inform our player if they, for example, if the game is over, if they have scored. You might have seen the score text at least when I showed you the demo of what we're gonna achieve. So let's start adding some UI. From the right click again to the hierarchy, I want to add a UI and then text and Text Mesh Pro. Text Mesh Pro is this Unity built-in or Unity provided package that provides a bit more control over the text in Unity than the traditional text that Unity has built in. Let's click on the text, and then it will ask us if we want to import the TMP essentials. Let's click on that. We want to have the support installed to the system. All right, we don't need the examples or extras now, so let's just close that and see what happened. So now we have a canvas here. Double clicking it will show you the bounds of it as this white thin line around the rectangle, and then we have some text that has now appeared on the lower left corner of the canvas. Let's quickly make it so that the canvas is scaled to full HD resolution that I'm also setting as the reference resolution for my game window. This is just purely for like making it easy to scale things. And if you, for example, build this to an executable for Windows or Mac, then the canvas will scale correctly. So let's change it to scale its screen size and then input the full HD resolution as the reference resolution for the game. This is not mandatory if you miss this step. Nothing bad is going to happen if you're now just trying to play in the editor. All right, now we have our text here. So, oh, and one thing, also when it created a canvas, it created this event system here. This is for use with the UI. So if you would add a button, for example, in the UI that the user can click, then this is needed to support the input from the UI. But we're not using it, so we can just safely delete it. But it doesn't matter if you leave it in there too. All right, so let's work with this first text object. We will call it simply score. This will be our score text at the bottom so that you will see how many points you already gathered. Let's write some placeholder text there. Say score is 0. And then I've also downloaded a bit nicer font for the text. So let's select the Fedago one font. That's a free font from Google Fonts. All right. Let's then, this is called the rect transform that specifies the position of the UI element in the canvas. Let's center the game object, the text object in the bottom part of the screen. And when you press the Option or Alt button on Mac, at least, you can get this anchoring view. So we want to anchor the game object here and also set position as Unity kindly suggests here. So when you press Alt, it will also change the position of that object to be there. So let's click here, and we see that the score text jumped to the bottom of the screen and in the center. We can maybe move it up a bit. You can do it from here, move it, or then move the coordinates here to a place that you prefer, maybe something like 60 pixels from the bottom. And then you can increase the font size a bit, maybe something like 54. And now we see that the text overflowed from the size that we had, so we can just set the wrapping to disabled so that it will keep it on one line. And let's just center the text in the center and middle of the object. So then we will have a nice score text in our game. All right, then we also want to have a game over text to inform the player when the game is over. So let's just duplicate this one. You can either right click and then duplicate, or I pressed Command D, Control D, works on Windows, to duplicate the text. And we will make this our game over text. So let's name it game over right here. Game over. And then we want this to be somewhere at the top and show that when the player is that. Let's change the color to black as our background is quite light so we can see it better. And again, we want to anchor it to the top and center, so let's click that. All right, now we've got some nice text there. Let's move it a bit down. Maybe I want to make it a bit bigger still so that it's clearly visible. And then I want to create one more text. I'll duplicate the game over text with the Command D or Control D. I'll call this text tap to restart. These names don't matter that much. We won't be accessing them through the names. And then I'll just write the instructions. Tap to restart here and position it somewhere. But actually what we want to do, we want to pair these two texts together so we can take the flap to restart text and drag it under or on top of the game over text. So it will move to the child of the game over text. And this way, when we activate or deactivate the game over text, also the child object will deactivate and activate with it. Let's make that text maybe a bit smaller. Nice. And then maybe position it a bit higher up so that it looks nice. All right, perfect. Let's then, in the end, hide this. We only want to show this when the game is over, so let's not show it in the beginning. All right, I'll quickly again check the chat and then we will continue on creating a game controller. No questions. Hoping everyone is doing okay and nicely following along. All right, let's then start creating the game controller. So let's go back to the project here, and we want to also create a game object for that. So let's create an empty game object here. This will be empty. It won't be visible. There's nothing visible in the scene when it's empty. And let's call it game controller. We will want to add a script of the same name. So in the assets and scripts folder, I will create a new C# script and call that also game controller and attach. It is now compiling, takes a moment. All right, and attach that script to my game controller. So I can now search from the add component menu and select the game controller. All right, let's then start editing this one. So let's double click it here. It will again open in the VS Code or your editor of choice. If you're wondering why my code looks here a bit different than the template, I'm using OmniSharp. That is a tool for formatting your code, and I prefer to have my curly braces on the same line as my other script things. So I just formatted it and saved, but you can do whichever way you want and don't need to worry about the formatting now that much. All right, so now we want to handle here the situation when the bird dies, and then here also control the visibility of the game over text. So let's first create a void method called bird died. We'll call this a bit later to inform that the bird has actually died. So it's void and returns nothing. This is hopefully already familiar to from your other programming experience. All right, let's then bring in a reference to the game over text that we want to be using. So we will again be using the serialize field control, and then we will want to bring in a game object called, I don't know, game over text, for example. So now again, the serialize field modifier will make this visible in the Unity inspector, and we can assign a thing to it later. There's another possibility here. You could make this a public thing, and you would not need to add this here, but then this would be accessible from anywhere that has access to the game controller. So it's better to keep it private to the game controller, but expose it to the inspector this way. All right, so what do we want to do? We want to set this game object as active when the bird died, and we are calling this method. So let's write game over text, and then we're going to use this method called set active and pass it true so that it knows to set the game object active. With the same thing, we can also set things to non-active, just passing the false here. All right. So when do we want to call this? We want to call this, of course, when the bird script is dead variable is true. So we want to access that. I'm changing to the bird script now, and I want to make this is dead variable here a public one so that I can access it from the outside of the script, just as I mentioned what would happen with the game controllers serialized variables if we would set them to public and not use the serialized field modifier. I made it public, and as a naming convention, I usually prefer to have my public variables and methods start with a capital letter and the private ones with a smaller case or lowercase letter. So now we have access to this from outside if we have access to the bird script. So let's then make a field so that we can also access the bird script. And now the type of the variable is bird, as the bird script type is bird, and then let's just call the variable bird. Then we can, in the update method, check that if the bird is dead, then we will call the bird died method here. All right, now we have set this up so that the when the bird dies, the game over text will be set active. However, there's a small caveat here. The update method is called all the time, so this will be also called every frame that the bird is dead, and the bird died will be called, and this will be called. It doesn't matter, it will work, but for performance reasons and for kind of teaching you this too, I usually check that if the game over text active self, this tells me that if the game object is actually active in the hierarchy or not. And let's use the not operator in front to check that if the game over text is not active already, then set it to active. Otherwise, we'll do nothing. So that works. All right, then let's head back to Unity, wait again for it to compile our changes, and then select the game controller game object in the hierarchy. Now we want to set the game over text here, so you can just select the game over text, but don't select it, but just drag it here. It will appear here, and then we want to drag the bird object here too. So now we have set the references to those scripts in the game controller. All right, let's see if everything went well. Now when we press play, try the game a few times, and then when we let the bird hit the ground, we get the game over text. Great. We're getting closer. What we now want to do is we want to reload the scene. So whenever we have the instruction now to flap to restart, so whenever the bird is dead and we're showing the game over text, we then want to set the reload scene when the user presses a mouse button. So we're going to need this Unity's built-in thing called Unity Engine scene management. And from that, so here we will check if the bird is dead, and then if the same way as in the bird script, if we get a mouse button down 0, then we want to reload the scene. And this will happen with the built-in thing that Unity has, a scene manager, and that can load a scene, and then we will need to pass the active scene to that. So we will use the scene manager, get active scene, and then build index. This is just an integer to represent the current scene. So now, if everything went well, we will be able to reload and start again when the bird has died after hitting the ground. All right, flapping a bit. letting it hit the ground, and then flap to restart. Great, seems to work. Quickly checking the chat. All good, great so far. Let's then continue. Now we would of course need some obstacles, but first we need to have the ground smoothly scrolling away so that we can then also scroll the obstacles. All right, so for that we will create a new script again in the scripts folder. Let's call that, I don't know, scrolling object, for example. So what we will essentially do is that we have, if you see the ground that we have here, we will make the ground move from to the left, and then when it has gone out of view, we will recycle it again to the other side. So we will be recycling a few of these ground objects so that we can create an infinitely scrolling ground here. All right. To be able to move the ground component or the ground game object, we will need to add a component that's called the rigid body. We used that before with the bird, but here, instead of making it the dynamic one that reacts to physics, we will make it a kinematic one so that we can only control the parameters from script, and it won't be affected, for example, by the gravity that is built into the Unity scene. All right. Then let's start editing our scrolling object script. This will be a script that we attach to the ground game object. So now we can try and get here the things from the ground game object. So we will again want to use the rigid body 2D, call it RB, get it to the RB with the get component. The get component fetches from the game objects attached methods and stuff to get it here. And let's get it rigid body 2D, and this is the same as before. All right, we want to create again a serialized field to represent our scrolling speed. Let's make that a floating point number, and let's call that scrolling speed. We will set this in the inspector a bit later. So what do we want to do in the start? While now we have access to the rigid body, we just want to set the velocity of this rigid body to the scrolling speed, and we will want to do that only in the x direction. So let's make a new vector 2 that uses the scrolling speed as the x velocity and 0 as the y velocity, so it doesn't move up or down. All right, let's then, what do we want to do? One more thing to add here before we get back to Unity and set the scrolling speed to something else than 0 is that we want to stop the scrolling whenever the bird dies, so the world doesn't move anymore when you've lost the game. So let's make another method. Let's call it stop scrolling. Again, avoid method, it doesn't return anything. And what we want to do here is just simply set the RB's velocity to a vector 2.0, so it will zero out the velocity. All right. Let's go back to Unity now. I have again some compiler errors. The type or namespace serialized field attribute could not be found. Serialized field, what did I? Serialized field. Pretty close. A typo there. Let's catch it and fix it and recompile, and then the errors will go away. Nice. All right, so let's attach this now to the ground. Maybe it was calling it something like scrolling object here. And let's put the scrolling speed, for example, I don't know, -5. Let's test. We should see our ground scrolling away from under the bird. Works, but now of course we need to do the thing that I was talking about so that the ground also recycles to the other side so that we have infinite ground. All right, Let's first do a quick thing that I already mentioned, so that we want to stop the scrolling when the bird is dead. So again, creating a serialized field for the bird. We'll do this exactly the same way as we did with the game controller. And then here again, if our bird is dead, then let's call the stop scrolling method. Back to Unity, we'll need to assign the bird to the ground object. So now we see here the empty field for the bird. You can also press the little circle indicator here at the end of the field to find from the scene or the assets we want to assign the bird script from the scene here. So let's just do that. Let's also test if our world now stops from moving when the bird hits it. Perfect. All right. Then we will want to do the recycling of the ground objects. So yeah, we actually want to first duplicate the ground a few times so that we have 3 more, so that we can nicely put them at after each other, and then use the one that's not in view to recycle. Let's first create an empty game object just to clean this up a bit. Call it, I don't know, scenery, and then move all of these ground game objects as the child of that. This won't affect the gameplay in any way. We won't be using the scenery for anything, but it will just nicely group our grounds together. Now the grounds are each on top of each other, so we want to take the 2 latter ones and move them to the right a bit. An easy way of setting them exactly where you want them to be right after the second one is picking the size from the collider. And as we know that this is the full width of the element, we can use that to set the X position here, and then set the third ground X position to 2 times that. And this is a handy tip. You can write a calculation here and press enter, and it will actually calculate it for you and position it nicely. So now let's see, if now we have a 1 ground here, a second ground here, and the third one here. And all of them have the same scrolling object thing, so they will all scroll to the left. Now we just need to start recycling them in the end. And if anything looks weird in your scene here, the bird or the ground is not where it's supposed to be, just make sure that your scenery object is at 0, 0, 0 here. Sometimes Unity changes that position to something else. All right, so what do we now want to do? We want to create a script for the repeating background or repeating ground. I'll create a new script, repeating background. I'll call it as I called it in my template project too. And I will want to attach this to all of our ground objects, so I can select multiple ones and then add component to multiple ones at the same time at the repeating background here. All right. Well, then what we need to do, let's edit the script. The easiest way to access the size of the ground and to know where it's going and all that, we want to use again the rigid body 2D variable. We can even go and just go ahead and just copy this from here. Lazy enough to not type it again. So now we have the rigid body 2D, or actually we might want to use the collider. Actually, I'm changing my mind in the middle of this. Not really, I just checked my instructions and saw that I'm actually using the collider and not the rigid body. So let's get the box collider 2D to the box collider variable here. So as we already saw, the box collider knows the bounds of the object, and we will want to know the X length of that, or the width of that. So I'll just add a variable for us called length, and I will store there the box collider's size in the X direction. So now we know how wide the collider is, and thus how wide the object is. All right, let's then create a method for repositioning the background. So reposition background, And then what we want to do here is that we want to make the ground move to the right with an offset of length times 3, so it will jump to the end of the kind of 3 ground objects. So to set the game object position, we will use transform.position and set it to a new vector tree. This is always a vector tree, as Unity is inherently a 3D engine, and we can use the transformed position here and the x direction, and then add to that the length times 3. And the other components we want to keep as is, so just put back the transformed y and z coordinates here. And terminate with the semicolon. All right. So then we just need to know when do we want to do this, and it's easy to check. We know that if this transformed position is in the x direction less than minus length, so we move to the left so that we are at the x coordinate of minus the length, then we will need to reposition the background. All right, now we have created a possible script. Let's see if it works. Now it should, when the ground moves to the left, when it goes too far to the left, it should start repositioning itself. Let's see if another ground appears there while I'm flapping away to the right. You might see the seam in the game object somewhere, but now you saw in the scene view that while I'm flapping to the right, the grounds actually reposition themselves automatically. Great. All right. Now we have just one more thing to do that we want to be able to do. So we want to make the obstacles and make them then score the bird when the bird goes over that and all. I'll quickly check the chat. There's Kimberly has created a poll that you can answer there in the poll. And as I see that the time is already 20 past 5, I think we will be running a bit over time with this. I've spent so many minutes on my explanations that more than I expected to. So I hope that if you have time, watch it until the end. And of course, if you don't, you can watch the recording afterwards. But I happen to know that I'm the last one today doing this, so I have the extra possibility of running a bit over time. All right, so what do we want to do next? We want to create the icicles that I showed you before. Almost forgot the word. So we want to start by dragging this icicle object here into the hierarchy. All right, we see that it's there. We see that it's in the center. We see that it's maybe a bit small. You can select the scaling tool from here or press the R in your keyboard. And then if you take the white square here and drag from it, it will scale the object. Or you can just input numbers in the inspector to scale it up. Let's scale it up a bit and then use W or press here to access the move tool and then move it up. All right, maybe it's a bit small still, so I'll scale it up just a tiny bit more, move it up a bit somewhere so that we can nicely position it so that we're happy. And then we can create another one by duplicating this one here by pressing the Control or Command D. What we want to do is we want to flip it, so we can just easily make the Y scale a -1, a -1. So now it's flipped, and then we can, again, by dragging, reposition it a bit so that we'll have it nicely somewhere here, maybe a bit further down so that the bird can actually fit between the two icicles. We can move the bird also to check. All right, let's move the upper one also a bit up so there's a bit more space for the bird to go through the gap here. All right, now we have the icicles. What we want to add, we want to add colliders to them so that we'll know when the bird has hit them. So let's add a box collider to the, and we see now that it's quite huge. So we want to edit it. We want to edit it so maybe it's not exactly at the top, and then we can also squeeze it down from the sides a bit. So if you fall down right next to it, you won't hit it anymore. We're just interested that you pass through the gap in between and don't hit these two. And let's do the same for the other one. When you select an object here, you can also press F and it will frame it for you in the scene view. That's what I'm doing now here. Let's add the box collider. We again see that it's a bit big. Let's access the edit mode here from this button and then again scale it so that we are happy how it looks. Something like that. We can then hone it later, or you can hone it later if you want. All right, we want to then group these together. So let's create a parent object for them, call it icicles, and then drag these inside that one as the child objects to that. So now if you double click that, you'll see that the icicles object holds both of them. And what do we want to do? The last thing for the setup phase, we want to create a box collider for this one that we will be using for the scoring. So now you see that the box collider appeared here. It's a very small one, but luckily again, with the same tool, we can use to scale it so that it fills approximately the full gap. And this way, when the bird hits this, we will know that it's scored. However, we don't want this to act as a normal collider because all our colliders currently will kill the bird. So let's make it a trigger. Here's a selector for is trigger in the inspector for the box collider. All right, now we have set up the icicles object. One last thing that we want to be able to do is to move this also with the scrolling speed and scrolling object thing. So let's add a rigid body object to make it also kinematic so that it works the same way as the others. All right, and I think we also want to add the scrolling object script here, so it will scroll to the left. Or is it the scrolling object? Yes, it is. And then same scroll speed as the ground, and let's drag the bird object here. So now we have the bird there. Then the next thing we want to do is create a script for this object so that we can control whatever we want to do, and then create a new C# script. Let's call it icicles. And the thing that we want to detect here is that if you've hit the collider or trigger that we set up in the middle of the two icicles, then we will need to add to the score. All right, let's start editing the icicle script. Let's write here. We will use the built-in method for the triggers. It's called on trigger enter 2D, and then for this this method, it takes a parameter that is a collider 2D. Let's call it other. You can really choose the name for that. So Unity will automatically call this method when something hits the trigger. So what do we want to do here? We want to check that if the other game object or collider has a component bird, so that this is the bird, and so that it's not null. So then we want to do something. We want to do the scoring thing, but of course we don't have the scoring thing yet. So let's add that next. If you're wondering why my exclamation mark and equals mark changed into that, I'm using something called ligatures to in the editor to provide me this nice coding font thing. Oh no, my do not disturb mode went off. I hope that no one disturbs me now, so it should be fine. All right. Then what do we want to do? We want to create a connection between the game controller and this one to be able to update the score. So we will use something that I call callbacks, or Unity has a built-in support for, or C# has. We will be using thing from the system library. So let's add the using system at the top, and then we will set here, make a method that is called, it's actually a public method that sets the score callback. The score callback will be an action. I'll call it score callback here. Action is a thing that represents a function pointer, if you're familiar with those. It is just something that you can call later. Actually, we don't need any parameters for that. Score, you can call later, and then it will call the method that is attached to it. We will need a similar thing so that we can store this in the class. So let's create a class member variable, and then let's just set this with this score callback is the score callback that we get as a parameter. If you're not familiar with C#, this is just a way to reference the object that this class represents and the variable in there, and this is the one that we got as a parameter. So, okay, then if we enter the scoring trigger, then we want to call the score callback. Great. All right. The last thing we want to do with this icicles thing is we want to be able to create multiple ones of these from the code. So let's create what Unity calls a prefab. So let's go into the assets folder and create a new folder that we will call prefabs. All right, open the folder and then take the icicles parent object and drag it to the empty folder. This will create you something called prefab. This is something that you can then later on instantiate with all the contents, all the scripts attached, everything that it needs. All right. I'll quickly. Oh, you can also delete the prefab from the scene. I'll quickly check the chat. Someone says that it's a cool concept, flipping horizontally by scaling by a negative. I agree. It's a really handy tip because in Unity you cannot easily otherwise flip sprites, but if you put them to the scene and then use the scaling, then that's pretty handy. All right. What do we want to do next? We want to add the scoring callback that we just used to the actual game controller so that we can update the score text when needed. All right, so let's go to the game controller script here that we have open, and let's create another method that we will call bird scored. All right, so what do we want to do here? We want to update the text, so we want to get the text object here. For that, we will need using TM Pro. This is a shorthand for the Text Mesh Pro. And let's also add a serialized field for that. And now we want to get in a TMP text object. I'll call that score text. All right. So what do we want to do then? In here, we want to be able to update the scoring text, but also what we need for that, we will need a score variable. I'll just make it normal integer, set it to 0 in the beginning. So when the game starts, your score is 0, and then when you score, we will update the variable and then update the text accordingly. So let's do just that. So let's first increase the score, and then the score text and its text component, this might be a bit confusing, but that's how this Unity works, will be score and then the score variable. This is a string interpolation in C# that might be familiar from JavaScript, for example, if you already have done some JavaScript before. All right, so now we would need to connect this to the Icicles thing, but we will actually first need to do the kind of spawning of that and pooling of that and whatnot to be able to set this and all that. So let's get started with that now. So let's get back to Unity. Wait for the compile for a moment. Before we forget, let's set the score text here. You can also drag it from here. Both of the options work. So now the game controller has access to the score text. All right, the last thing now we want to achieve is the icicles coming and going. We will use for this something called object pooling. So we want to recycle the objects and not instantiate and destroy them one by one. So we will want to create a new script called Icicle pool. Unfortunately, pool doesn't have here anything to do with swimming. I wish. And then let's attach that to our game controller. So the a game object can have references to multiple scripts and all that. So that's not a problem, even if we use the same empty game object that our game controller is. Let's double click, open the not the Icicles one, but the Icicle pool. All right, and what we need here, first things first, we need to get access to the prefab that we just made from the Icicles. So I'll call it Icicles prefab. Let's save that and get back to Unity to actually set it. So let's see here. And this is a new thing. For now, we've been attaching here things from the scene, but actually we want to attach now the prefab from the project here. So you can do that by dragging, and of course you can find it from the small circle thing here. Now I also realized that, no, wait a second. Yeah, I was just looking at the wrong script here. Never mind. Let's continue with the Icicle pool. So then the other thing we want to be able to control, not mandatory, we can leave it up for now, is the pool size. So how many Icicles are we gonna repeat and then reuse? Let's set it to, I don't know, 10 for first. And the next thing we need is a game object array. With C# we will mark it with the brackets here, and then call it the, I don't know, Icicles. So then this is where we will store the Icicles that we create. To be able to create them, we also need somewhere to kind of store them before we use them in the game. So let's add a vector2 variable called pool position. That is, for example, at vector2 -50 so that they are out of the way and can't be seen until we move them into the game. Let's then initialize the Icicles array with the pool size, so we can configure that via the pool size variable. And now we want to make a traditional normal for loop. Autocomplete is always trying to suggest me a wait instead of my I. Sorry for that. But anyways, here we want to set always the ith object in the array to something that we instantiate with the built-in Unity method from the Icicles prefab at the pool position. And the last parameter this thing takes is the rotation for the object, and we don't want any rotation, so we're using a quaternion identity here. No need to know what that is, just know that it needs to be there for now. All right, so now we have created our icicles, and now we just want to be able to move them to the game view when needed. So we need to have a spawn rate. Let's make that a floating point variable for that we call spawn rate. So how often a new thing spawns. I don't know, maybe 4 seconds is good. You can then tweak it later depending on how you feel. And then we will need another float to track the time since we last spawned a icicle here. All right. Now what we want to do is that we, in the update method, first update always the time since last spawned with a built-in thing in Unity called the autocomplete time.delta time. This is the time that has elapsed since the last update was performed. So then we will accumulate that in the time since last spawned until we are happy, and then we will check if the time since last spawn is larger or equal to, I don't really care, to the spawn rate. And this is where we want to now then move the icicle to the correct position. For that purpose, we need a icicle index that we set to 0 in the beginning, so we know which icicle we are now reusing. All right, we also need to set up a floating point variable called spawn position x, so that we always spawn them to the right of the bird in some predefined position. So let's make that, I don't know, 40. We can tweak that later too. And then when we are spawning, if we want them to vary a bit in the y direction, so then let's create a random load for the spawn position y with Unity Engine has this built-in random method that has this range method, and let's say we go from 2.5 to plus 2.5 now. So now what we want to do, we want to set the icicle at icicle index and its transform position to this new vector 2 that we have from spawn position x and spawn position y to move the icicle that we are now processing to the correct place in the scene. All right, then let's increase the icicle index. We are done with this one. We want to use the next one when we next come here. And of course, we need to check that if the icicle index gets larger or equal to the pool size, then we'll just set it back to 0. So we are then reusing the first one again. All right, a lot of code happened here. Let's see where we get with this. Wait for it to reload, and then no compile errors, press play. We can see the icicles that were created here. Oh no, there's something wrong. Maybe I attached a wrong script to the icicles. Let's remove the scrolling object from it for now, so we can just see them appearing when, oh no, I killed myself. All right, something wrong with my scripts. Now I will need to figure out what went wrong. Why are they all spawning at the same time? All right, let's figure this out. So what was the problem is that I was using I am using the scrolling object for the for um, the moving of the icicles, but it actually doesn't have access to the bird because it was instantiated and the bird is in the scene. So we cannot use this serializing thing that we wanted to do, but instead we will need to find the game object when this object is added to the scene with this Unity built-in method called game object find, and then we can find with the name bird, and then we can from that game object get the component bird, so we actually have access to the to the um, to the bird script from that object. So let's then try again. Let's add the scrolling object script back here as it was causing us some problems before. And let's try again. Right now we have the icicles again spawned and in the lower part, as you see. But now they are still all there and not moving. Maybe I have set up the moving script or the icicle script or the icicle pool script. Let me think about this now. So what would be wrong? Spawn rate seems good. It's active. Let's set them. Also chime in the chat if you now see the icicle index is somewhere around. Someone is suggesting that that is wrong, but what would be wrong with it? I'm not seeing it. Maybe I'm just blind. Well, I can always go, and as I have my backup, my ready-made project, let me just quickly open that and see how that was set up in there. Because we want them to be scrolling as smoothly as the one that I showed you. So let's see how it was set up here. It has a scrolling object. I probably did not set the speed when I added the scrolling object, and I also seem to be missing the Icicle script, maybe from the Icicles one. Let's see what happened here. So my Icicles prefab has a scrolling object thing. It doesn't have a speed as found there. Someone asked if it's the missing callback. Not yet. We are not using that yet, but we will. Oh no, I will need to add because we were not using it yet due to the fact that I forgot to add the Icicle script here. But soon we will run into problems if we don't set the callback, and that's exactly what we're gonna do next. But let's do that first, and then let's see if everything is working. So what we wanted to do, a good point, is that we wanted to set the score callback, but to be able to set to the Icicles object here, we will need to have access to it also here in the Icicles pool. So let's just go here, copy the score callback variable here, and let's copy this method. So we want to first set the score callback to this object, the Icicle pool. Now that we have access to it, we can also for each of the Icicles call the set score callback and set it to this score callback that we now have access to here. And actually we cannot set it there because we need to get the Icicles component that has it. The game object doesn't have a method for setting score callback, but the Icicle script does. All right, and then now we have set the score callback. One final thing that we need to note here is that the order of things. Now we have the game controller and the Icicle pool object both attached to the the start and the game controller, and they both will call to start, and the order will be random, so we won't know what happens there. But let's first, before we forget, get the Icicle pool here. Or actually, we can just do it in the start. So let's get the get component Icicle pool, as it's attached to the same game object as this script. We can just do this, and then what we want to do, we want to be setting the score callback, and this time we want to pass the bird scored method as we were planning to do. All right, the last thing we wanted to do is to, oh no, action was not found here in the Icicle pool, as I forgot to add the using system here that provides us with the action type. So yeah, the last thing that we need to do is that we want to set the script execution order, which can be found in the project settings. So from edit, I access the project settings, and here I want to make sure that the game controller script is executed before the Icicle pool to be able to make sure that the scoring callback is set in the correct order. All right, apply that, and then let's try. Now I'm a bit scared and excited at the same time. All right, now our icicles spawned. They should be also recycling. Okay, there's still something wrong with the icicles. Pretty close, but not quite. And now we cannot test our scoring callback either. The good thing is that we're not getting any errors in the console log that we are seeing. So maybe I'm scrolling them in the wrong direction or something. Might be that it's the Y direction or something that is now haunting me. Let's try to fix that up, because when that works, our game should be fairly ready. Let's check what did we do with the Icicle script. We are just setting the score callback here. We are setting the trigger. This seems good. Then the icicles pool and the scrolling object ones are the ones that I'm suspecting. So we have here the scrolling speed that we just set up in the editor. We fixed the reference to the bird. We are stopping the scrolling. This is pretty simple. And as we know that the ground is already scrolling and it seems to work, and the bird died when it died, or the game over happened. So then maybe something is wrong with our icicles pool that is supposed to move them to the correct position. So we are using the icicle index. Now you'll see me live debugging things and trying to figure out what's wrong. Let's see what variables we had. Icicles prefab, that seems to be working, as we have the icicle spawning. That seems good. We have the spawn rate set. We have the time set. The icicles are spawned, so I think the start code works, and the scoring callback we cannot test yet, as we we cannot score yet, as the icicles don't move. So that seems all good. I am storing the created icicles in the array. Someone asked if we can start to wrap up, please. Yes, we will. This is the final thing. If I get this working, we are done. But I would hope to show you a working thing if we can. Someone asked in the chat if it's spawn rate, but I think spawn rate is good because we have set that as 4 seconds, or the floating point variable. Time since last spawned. Now I know what I'm not doing. I am not setting the time since last spawn to 0, because it should not. It should always reset when we have again spawned the spawned the icicle. Let's try. Now I'm confident that it will work because that's the only thing that I seem to be missing. Perfect. And now we got a score. All right. Seems to be working. I hope this was nice. Sorry for taking a bit over time and sorry for the problems at the end. Happens sometimes when live coding, so great. All right. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have, and I'll be here. Thanks for being here. Sorry for the problems, and I will share you now in the chat also a Git repository where you can download a final product that I made a few days back just to try it out myself. So you can check there if you have any problems while following this after. It also has a written step-to-step instructions that I was following or planned to follow to do this so everything works. There's a quick question. Could you set the icicles to scroll at a different speed to the ground? Yes, you could. The scroll speed, if you want to change it for the icicles, you can change it there and make it different, make it faster. You can even try and look at the time that has passed since the game has started and make it faster bit by bit so the game gets harder. An idea for you to try out maybe yourself.